Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera. After going through the importance of OBE, why OBE, now let us move on to the second subsection. Subsection is on the terminologies related to OBE. It is very important for us to have a common understanding on this terminology. There are a few of them, three of it, but the later one will be explained during the next session. I will concentrate on the first five first, which is number one, OBE, then learning outcomes, programs, educational objectives and programs aims, program learning outcomes or program outcomes, and last but not least, course learning outcomes or course outcomes. Now, what is OBE? OBE focus on the students' learning or student outcomes, and using learning outcome statements or learning outcome statements to make explicit what the student is expected to be able to know, understand, or achieve, or able to do upon the period of learning. And then providing learning activities or instructions, teaching activities, which will help the students to achieve or to acquire these outcomes, and assessing the extent to which the students meet these outcomes through the use of explicit assessment criteria. So, in other words, OBE means starting with a clear picture of what is important for the students to be able to do, then organizing the curriculum, instruction, and assessment to make sure that this learning ultimately happens. And the three issues has been addressed through Felder and Brand, where students are the center of learning, the focus point, and it needs to have these learning outcomes, what the students should be able to do as a result of teaching and learning, and then what teaching activities to adopt in order to achieve the intended learning. And the third question need to be addressed is how to ensure that they have achieved the learning outcomes. And it has to be aligned one another. So in other words, in an OBE curricula, they must have program objectives, program outcomes, course outcomes, and a performance indicator. Secondly, you need to address the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to be attained by the students, which is centered around the needs of the students and the stakeholders. And the course outcome must satisfy the stated program outcomes, includes different delivery methods, not only the traditional learning lecturing method, and the outcomes must be assessed and evaluated based on suitable performance indicator, and we need to address the program educational objectives within 3 to 5 years after their graduation. And last but not least, in an OBE curricula, CQI or the continuous quality improvement is very important. Now, we go to the learning. What does learning outcomes mean? Learning outcomes focus on what learner has achieved rather than the intention of the teacher. And learning outcomes focus on what the learner can demonstrate at the end of the learning activities. And there are several different levels of learning outcomes. It depends on the period of completion. If it is 5 years after graduation, It is mainly deal as educational aims or goals, program educational objectives. But if the period, if it is upon graduation, then we call it as program outcomes or program learning outcomes, is what the students should be able to do, achieve upon graduation. And if it is upon course completion, then we call it as course learning outcomes or course learning or course outcomes, or sometimes call it as learning objectives. So learning outcomes is essential, very important, because it defines the time and depth of the learning students are expected to achieve. It provides an objective benchmark for formative, summative, and prior learning assessment. Learning outcomes is important also because it clearly communicates expectation to the learners, also to the stakeholders as well. And it also guides and organizes the instructor and the learner. It's also important because it also guides the selection or design of an appropriate assessment. It also allows educators to match teaching strategy to stated outcomes and allow us to assess the impact of the instruction. And it also acts as a template for course design. A good learning outcomes usually are SMART. It is specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and also time-bound. Next, program educational objectives and program aims. So, as I mentioned earlier, program educational objectives and program aims are specific statements on what a learner is expected to learn to achieve the program aims, which is an overarching statement, a broader statement on the purpose, philosophy, and the rationale in offering the programs. So the PEO should be broad and are planned for long-term results. This is examples of a program education objectives. It usually encompasses of 3 components: the discipline itself, and then the self-development, and also what contributes to the society. And programs aims are the one that is overarching the statements on the purpose, philosophy, and rationale of the programs. Next, program learning outcomes or program outcomes, PO or PLO, right? It is the program, the statements of what are the necessary ability, attributes, quality do they need to have upon graduation, upon finishing their studies, in order to prepare them to be who they are in future. These are examples of program outcomes or program learning outcomes where we stated begin with the end in mind. What are the knowledge, skills, or attitudes that the student able to achieve, able to attain upon graduation? These are examples. Another example, and it includes not only the specific core knowledge. For example, in this case is for engineering, it's not only narrowed down to civil engineering knowledge alone, but it includes also the skills and also the soft skills. For example, here, PO5, ability to communicate effectively, is also explicitly explained, included. And also apply engineering management, for example, and ability to perpetually seek and acquire contemporary technical changes, technology changes, and also entrepreneurial skills. So the program outcomes are not only looking at the knowledge, but also skills and also the attitudes or soft skills. These are how the program learning outcomes are mapped towards the program educational objectives and subsequently to the program aims. So we need to map it so that we know what sort of program outcomes are attributed, that contributed towards the achievement of the program educational objectives. These are some of the mapping. I took this program learning outcomes, the PO, from a SIN manual, a SIN subject specific criteria, SSC, for civil engineer. And there are 18 program outcomes that need to be addressed in the civil engineering curriculum at UNS. So these are all the program outcomes that must be documented, stated, and not only stated, it has to be taught, it has to be learned by the students, and at the end, it has also to be assessed at the end of the day. Last but not least is on course learning outcomes or course outcomes. That would be the next level upon completing a particular course in a semester. Now, course learning outcomes is to ensure every single student achieve the intended program outcomes upon finishing their study. All courses must provide clear and explicit learning outcomes called course learning outcomes, and these course learning outcomes or COs must be mapped accordingly to the appropriate program outcomes. This is example here. For example, in the program outcomes, meaning to say that the student that's able to attain upon graduation at the end of the study. One of the PO is on ethics and integrity. It has to be addressed in one or many other courses. And for example, here it's been addressed in course C. And in course C, there is a course outcomes that's specifically a statement specifically addressing the ethics and integrity. For example, here, the course outcome, they're able to identify and discuss potential conflict of interest between financial, environmental, and social needs within the context of course and subject learned. And this will be carried out by in the course, and accumulation of similar costs that will contribute towards the ethics and ethics and integration will be carried out also in other courses as well. So these are, for example, the course outcome and program outcome mapping. So for each course, right, for each course that is being designed, it has to address the program outcomes. And this is how we map it, meaning to say that, for example, for engineering survey and fieldwork, for example, here, it is addressing the knowledge and then the ability to use tools and techniques, skills, modern techniques, and also it's also addressing the ability to function effectively as an individual and also in a team working. So these are the three main outcomes that need to be addressed by this particular course here. And it is similar to the other courses as well. And it is reflected, it's been shown in the lecture plan or course outline, whatever name that you are used to it. Some they call it course information. So in the course information or lecture plan or course outline, so the the course outcomes are clearly stated in the following way. For example, here, the course outcome have 5. It not only the knowledge, but also including the skills and also the soft skills as well. For example, they work effectively in a team. So it's also soft skills. So how to write an effective course outcome will be explained in the later or the next subsection. Okay, that's about it on terminologies and related to OBE. Thank you.